Okay, so good to see you folks here from Stonehouse. Fun to see you. I haven't seen you for a while. Thanks for inviting me. Everybody here at Eli. I know I've been here before, and I've done a docent training for some of you. So I have brought some handouts. So you might want to pass those to the new people who are in training. I might have 10 or 12 of each thing, so pass them around to whoever needs them if you already have that information. If you don't know me, my name is Linda Lake. I've lived in Lake County for about 35 years, and I've been associated with the museum system in Lake County for 18 years now. February 1st is in 18 years. I can't hardly believe that. And in the course of that 18 years, I've dealt with a lot of things that you folks may find you're going to be dealing with at some point in your lifetime here at the Eli or the Stonehouse or Gibson. I've dealt with bats, rats, lost cats, misplaced keys, fleas, and injuries, bees, people climbing trees, and a tightrope walker, actually, if you can believe that. People in pajamas, you know, just anything you can probably think of that could happen or go wrong, it's going to at some point. So part of the docent training is be prepared, right? Be prepared. So I'll try to prepare you in as many ways as I think I can in this short session. So we'll start. And the first place I like to start is opening and closing procedures. And if anyone would like to have my outline that I'm going to be working on, Greg, will you be my assistant?
Sure.
And you can kind of follow along on what I'm talking about. With those. So opening and closing, I like to start with, because you can't do anything until you drive in the gate and you open and close. And you guys have a gate, we have a gate. Gates are really important, and you have to know how to open and close everything if you're a docent, correct? So you have to start with that, and you have to know what the locks are, what they do, how they work, where the keys are. You have to carry your keys. You have to bring your keys. My brand new assistant forgot his keys yesterday, and that's a pain in the butt when somebody forgets their keys. You have to know where the doors are and where the lock is and where the lights are. You have to know where the alarm is. And you have to know where the heat and air is, right? So those are the first important things. Now, do all of you docents who are docents, do you all know all of those things?
Yep.
Yes, right? How about new people?
We train them up pretty good.
So do you start out with the new people training, you know, those important issues first, right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. And then, do you get a little deeper? You go a little deeper into the water main, the fuse box, the emergency key, all of those things, so that if there is an emergency, they would know where things are and how to shut things off and on and all of that. Earthquake, you know, we live in earthquake country, know how to shut off the gas and the heat and all that. So that's an important part of the functional training of the building and grounds and the opening and closing of the museum. I'm sure you have an alarm code and all of that. At our museums, we have a lot of doors that are all keyed to the alarm. I think in Lakeport, there's something like 10 doors that have to be shut before the alarm will go. So it's best if you're going to be the person coming and opening and closing that you have a routine. And that's how I teach my docents is you can't just willy-nilly walk around the building and think you've got everything done. You really need to have a routine, so you start at one end and go all the way through. And you know where the light switches are and all the doors you have to open and close. It's probably probably more important where we are because it's built that way and there's a lot of rooms. But it's also something to think about your own routine, because when you have a routine, then you tend not to forget something. And every time you open and close, think about your routine and get it ingrained in your mind, and then you won't freak out when you get halfway down the driveway and say, oh, did I remember to lock that? You know, we've all done that frequently. I do it a lot these days, and I go back and check. Routine helps. I teach them that, and kind of we walk around in a certain pattern so we get everything. Second important thing is always have what? If you get to the museum, or you can't get to the museum, you got to have a backup plan. So I'm sure your docent teachers will give you a backup plan if you can't come in, if you're sick, if something's going on with you and you don't make it to the museum on time for it to open. There's a backup plan and a phone number for you to call. Also, you need to have an emergency plan. That could be in writing, or it could be something that you're taught, just very basic information. Call 911, right? That's the most basic information you can have, but that's not always the most efficient. I have, in all the years that we've had this horrible elevator at the Lower Lake Museum that's given us fits many, many times, calling 911 has always been the last resort, because they will come and they will ruin the equipment to get somebody out of there and cost you tens of thousands of dollars perhaps. So maybe there's some things you can learn to do, or you can use common sense to do before you have to call 911. So that's also something that you can discuss and think about scenarios and which way you want to go with certain scenarios. Had I had to call 911 every time we had an elevator that got stuck halfway, we would probably no longer have an elevator. I've never done it. We've always been able to solve it and get the people out ourselves without harming the equipment. So something to think about, your emergency plan. And you've got to cover all the emergencies too. Even some that you might not even think of offhand, like, let's see, bats that get in the wiring, or rats that get under the building, or mice that get inside the building. Rattlesnakes, yeah, that's a good one here. Yeah. Any other ones? That's a good one. But yeah, there's a lot. Personal injury is a big one. I don't know, have you ever had any injuries here at all?
Yes.
You have? Yeah. And did you have to call emergencies?
Fortunately, we had a resident EMT with us.
That's good.
But, yeah, the lady tripped over one of the parking bumpers in the parking lot at the entrance there. Yeah, actually 2 people have done that.
Yeah.
So we've taken to putting up something so that it draws their attention that there is a parking bumper right in the walkway as you come out of the parking lot.
Yeah. Yeah, so you don't want, it's hard. You have to have a procedure in place. If you're just a docent and Greg's not here, what do you do if somebody falls and hurts themselves? So that's a really important one. Do you have a form? Do you have county forms for that?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, we created an operations plan that all of those received that go step by step.
Covers all of that. Good, that's awesome. So I don't have to talk anymore about that. That's great.
I'll send it to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I might have it on here already. Let's see. Getting into, since we have that manual in place, that's really good. I'll move on to the museum. What's really important at the beginning of every day for the museum is not only for the museum to know who's here, who's volunteering hours and how many hours they spend? Who knows why that's important? Can someone tell me?
Grant hunt?
Exactly, thank you, Linda. Grants, they want to know how many volunteer hours it takes, you know, or that you rack up. That can be a big number that you want to keep track of. So you want your docents to sign in, you want to know how long they're here, and that's probably part of your procedure also when people come in to work at the museum. Then there's also the people who have to sign in, and you keep track, I'm sure, of the number of visitors, correct? And that's also for grants, and the number of schools and tours and all of that. All those statistics are extremely important down the road. And you never know when somebody might ask you those statistics and really need them, because sometimes you have to go in front of the Board of Supervisors and convince them that you're important. You need those kinds of numbers, as I did recently. So that's the beginning of the day. Then you get into the gift shop and procedures there, and I'm sure I don't have to go into what your gift shop procedures are, because you probably have really good training on that, and where the money goes, and how the money is collected, and how that's all done. And I'll just, you know, I put it in my outline, but I'm sure that's something that you give people training on. And then another one that you might not do on a regular basis, but one that I do on a regular basis at both museums, is I do a safety check. If there's anything the county hates, it's, you know, lawsuits. So I try to walk around the building outside. I walk around the inside. And I just look to see that everything's in order, make sure there hasn't been vandalism. I check around inside to see if there's no wires or anything, rugs, whatever, hanging out that could be a liability to visitors coming in. It's important because sometimes things do change, and you might have not been told of the change. And if you see a change, it might be important to report it to somebody. The basket that we had stolen at Lakeport about a year and a half ago, we don't even know when it was stolen because it took us several days to know that it was gone. And it would have been important had somebody known it sooner, so we could have pinpointed the time. So I can't stress that one enough. And that's probably not something in your manual maybe to do that kind of a check. And vandalism happens, especially in Lower Lake because it's kind of isolated. So I always check the outside of the building for those sorts of things. It's a good thing for docents to do because they're here and they have the time to maybe spend a few minutes looking around. Any questions about that stuff so far? Any thoughts, ideas? Anybody want to say anything? And join me?
Linda?
Yes.
Actually, we're starting to develop an injury, the IIPP, Injury Illness Prevention Plan for the museum. So that we'll have yet another procedure in place. That was brought to my attention, frankly, just this morning, that the hay-rides that we do here on the Fiddler Jam session, with the equipment we use, going to have to discontinue that until I can make some repairs to it.
Oh, yeah.
You know, liability issues.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we have furniture. And you really can't sit on it. So you want to make sure you have a sign that says people don't sit on the chairs. Yeah, there's so many little things, as you know, and as you've learned so far, since Eli's been open, there's so many little details. So for new docents, what is a docent and what do they do? Anybody want to answer that one briefly about what they think a docent is and what they do?
A meter and greeter.
A meter and greeter? Yeah, yeah. Why do they call it a docent? Anybody know? It's a strange word. It really does lend itself to museums for the most part. Nobody else has ever called it docent, I don't think, although it comes from a word that means teacher or lecturer. So you're more than just a meter and greeter, in my opinion. You have information that you can give to enhance the visitor experience. And I think you should think of yourself as that. You're not just sitting there ready to say, hi, how are you today, and really make people feel comfortable. But you also want to make sure that you've enhanced their experience in one way or another. And that can be many, many different ways. It can just be telling them where the nearest restaurant is, But sometimes if you do that, you've really enhanced their experience. And you can probably think of a time where you've gone to a museum and the experience has been maybe not so good, or maybe it's been really, really good because the people were really nice and helpful and you got all the information you wanted. I have examples, but does anyone have an example of a time they went to a museum and it was a bad experience?
We just had a good one.
You had a good one? All right, tell us your good one.
So we were in Windsor, went to the Historical Society in Windsor, and there was a husband and wife working there, and they were very good. They were very informative, and
Cute anecdotes about when the Dust Bowl came up and folks came out of Texas and Oklahoma, settled in Windsor, that people looked down on them, shunned them. 5 years later, they opened a POW camp and they just loved the German POWs that came off the submarine. There's a picture of the POWs sitting there and they all have a beer in their hand, they're singing away.
it was pretty interesting. Yeah.
All right, so the most important words I heard, cute anecdotes. Isn't that an awesome word? 2 words? Isn't that an awesome way for people to leave a museum and say, wow, I got some really cute anecdotes from those docents. Love it. You might put that in your bag of tricks. Yes?
And I find here, I'm guessing it's the same as Stonehouse and Gibson, that to be a docent you have to listen, because people who come in see something in it, they share out anecdotes with us.
Yes, I've had a lot of
Listening is
that.
a big part of it.
Yes. Yeah, definitely, and they do. They will teach you also. And thank you, Vaughn. Yeah, listening is very good. Listening also comes into play because silence is golden to some people and some visitors who don't want a lot of information. Yes, Forrest?
One of the things we're talking about doing at Gibson, because we have a lot of people who have grown up in the area coming back, is to have a video recorder or a recorder so that they can tell you the stories. We've done that a couple of times and people have come in to look at different things and talk about them.
And those are local people more than
Yes.
visitors.
Yes.
Yeah, that works really well for locals who are willing to sit down for a few minutes and talk. Yeah, that's a great idea. Let's see. So you're a giver of information, and you have to have a little bit of information in your brain to give to people. So I heartily advise that you read history, review history, review ideas and thoughts and things that you might be interested in that you would like to impart to your visitors. And I stress things that you might be interested in, because what fun is it for you to learn something that doesn't interest you? But there's enough Lake County history to interest everybody. And maybe you're not interested in the geology, but you might love to tell people the 8 peaks of Mount Magna and the height of every peak. And that's easy to find the information. You can memorize it, you can have a sheet, but you can have a cute anecdote to tell people. I have a cute anecdote in here somewhere. And I also have the 8 Peaks of Canocti, if anybody would like one of those.
Yes.
And with the height, so Greg, you can pass those out. Let's see if I have this in here somewhere. My cute anecdote for you guys is a newspaper article. It's right here that I found, and it's actually from Long Beach, California, and it's from 1953, September 4th. Does anybody know what happened on Mount Canocti in 1953?
What was it again?
It happened on Mount Canocti in 1953.
Is that when that plane hit the peak?
Yes, very good, John. He knows. So here's a cute anecdote. Francis G. Weber, 50, of Pomona, considered himself very lucky today to have escaped death in the crash of a small plane. Weber, a guided missile plant worker, had been vacationing hereabouts. He was flying from a nearby airport Tuesday to fill his gasoline tanks for the return to Pomona when the mishap occurred. Weber's light plane was caught in an air current on the east side of Mount Canocti. The craft clipped off the tops of trees and was demolished against a rocky hillside. He and his companion, Donald McCrae, a local real estate man, fell from the wreckage, walked a mile, and flagged a passing motorist. Weber suffered back and shoulder injuries, but a spokesman for Lakeside Community Hospital said his condition was good. McCrae escaped with minor cuts and bruises. So there, you can repeat that to anyone you like.
If you hike to the peak of Canocti, you walk right past the wreckage. It's still sitting there.
Yeah, there's a piece of the wreckage that's never been removed from there. So that's the story, and I didn't know the story. I didn't know that they survived that little plane crash. So when you have things like that, it's kind of fun to be able to tell people about. Also, people are going to ask you things like, where's the bathroom? You know, and that may sound silly, but if you don't know where it is, what good a docent are you? You know? Heck. So you need to know the little things also. You need to know where the restaurants are. You need to know what the highways are. You need to know how long it's going to take you to get from here to Ukiah or from here to Santa Rosa. There's all those little things that people are going to ask you. And if you have favorite restaurants in Lake County, all the better, because you can tell them why you like the food. We do this almost daily in Lake Worth. People are always asking what restaurant should they go to. So those are kind of fun things, and you will be asked them. Let's go down to, you are in control of the situation, to an extent. You are in control of the situation in your museum, as we all tend to call it, because we do feel like it belongs to us, because we've created and worked so hard with it and all of that, and I don't mind that at all. I don't mind that feeling of it's our museum. But it's really their museum, too, and we hold our collections in the public trust. And you really, your job is to make sure that everyone that comes gets to enjoy everything that you have as much as possible. So, what happens if you feel like things are getting out of control? Maybe there's a situation where someone is belligerent or even threatening. Maybe there's someone under the influence. Maybe there's someone who's just doesn't look like he's on the up and up. I don't know. Have you ever had any experiences like that before?
Yeah.
Anybody? Yeah.
Happens occasionally in life, you know. It occasionally happens, I think, to almost everyone sometime in their life.
Yes, even if you're not at the museum, maybe you've felt that in somewhere else. I've felt it many times. Go ahead, Linda.
Well, one weekend, or one day we were here, Craig and I, a family came with 3 or 4 little kids, and the little kids went out on our playground stagecoach up in the front of the house. And first they got in it, and that was okay, but then I looked out and 2 or 3 of them were up on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
And jumping and just, and I'm like, oh, my.
You felt a little, what do I do?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're out of control.
And the parents, they were just, and so I finally got the mother and I said, they can be in it, they cannot be on top of it.
Uh-huh.
She was like,
Oh, those kids were.
So you handled it well, yeah. And sometimes it can throw you though, so that's something you might practice, you might role play with each other when you have your meetings. You might discuss situations like that, like Linda had happened to her. Go ahead.
Yeah, because when we had science camp, there were kids out on the cable car,
Uh-huh.
and they were shaking it and
Running back and forth.
running and shaking it sideways. The parents were sitting right there,
Uh-huh.
but I
Yeah.
still went down there and talked to them. But
Mhm.
yeah,
Yep, exactly. It happens, and you have to be prepared, and we've had to prepare, our staff a few times. When that basket was stolen, shortly afterwards, 2 men came into the museum. We got brand new cameras and security equipment after that was stolen. And shortly after that, these 2 men were in the museum, and the front desk person alerted us to the fact that he saw them on the camera taking off the mannequin clothes, looking in the pockets of the mannequin's tuxedo up in the parlor. And so he alerted us to the fact, and I just said, well, I'm just going to go up there and tell them. I didn't even hesitate. I mean, I didn't feel threatened or anything. I just felt like I'm in charge here and I'm going to go tell them. And I did, and I started walking up the stairs and they started coming down. And I said, excuse me, we have a policy where you don't touch the artifacts here in the museum. And we did notice that you were touching the artifacts in the parlor, and so I'm afraid that I might have to ask you to leave if you're going to continue to do that. Before I could even say it, they were down the stairs, one of them was, and he was in the basket room. And the other one, I heard him say, the other one walked in to get him, and he said, they can see us. And then they took themselves out the front. So,
being proactive was good.
yeah, but then and I wasn't fearful because there were enough people around that they would do anything to me, and they didn't, of course. But it was very helpful that they knew that we could see them. So that was a good deterrent. Yes,
Do you have a sign up as you come in that there are cameras in?
We do.
You do, so they just didn't notice it.
it's not very prominent, but it is a disclosure, and our camera monitor is right at the front desk where everybody can see it.
And the basket that was taken, was it in a case? or-
Yes.
It was, yeah.
They took they pried the top glass
Oh.
they pried it up with a tool, because it's a very, very heavy piece of glass, a very long case.
You
Heavy
figured it was
piece.
safe where it was.
And they pried it up that way. Yeah, it's since been sealed, Any way that they can get into it, they will figure out.
How did they get out with that basket, Linda? Because you've got somebody
It-
right there.
Small, it was
Oh, it's a small basket.
Mhm.
Oh,
yeah, one of the very small ones. So being able to feel in control is important. Being able to take charge and say what you have to say to someone is important. It's something to practice because you want to say it correctly, because you still want to be, kind and not offend people, especially about their children. So what I use, when it's children doing something bad, I always try to say, well, we have rules, and these are the rules, and if you don't follow them, so, and sometimes if you have children come in and they're not even accompanied by an adult, and we have had that happen, I try to teach my staff to tell them the rules before they even go anywhere. Stand them right there and tell them, these are the rules here. If you break the rules, I'm going to tell you you have to leave. But if you're, if you follow the rules, have fun, have a wonderful time, look around. So we try to do it that way. Let's move on to the museum. You have a mission statement, and I'm sure your docents all know what that is, so that's important. That helps them just to define anything that might even come up, especially people who come to the museum and want to donate something. The mission statement, to have that in your mind or to have it written down is helpful, so that you can have an idea of what to say to someone who brings things to the museum. And they might come on your watch and there's nobody around and you need to know what to say to them. Maybe they're bringing, a jack-o'-lantern from 1950 and you don't really want a jack-o'-lantern from 1950. It doesn't really fit. So kind of good to know what your accession policy is, what your acceptance policy is, and how you go about telling people yes or no, or do you? Maybe you don't make that decision, maybe you use a form, or you take their information, or whatever procedure you decide on, but there should be a procedure, so that docents aren't standing there saying, well, I don't know what to do with the pumpkin. And leave everybody wondering, I have a form, and if the people don't even have the item with them, it's sort of a potential donor form, and if they do have the item, it's a gift agreement. But if it looks like a yard sale item, and they want to get rid of it, and they don't care, we always make sure we tell them that if you sign this agreement, we're not agreeing to put this in our permanent collection. You're agreeing to give this to us, and we can do whatever we want. So I always explain that to people, especially if I think it's a yard sale item. Every docent should also know the administration and governance of your museum. Where does the money come from and who pays the bills? Where does the money come from? Who wants to answer?
Boris.
Boris.
Yes. Thank you very much.
The public, it comes from the public. It's donations and,
Right.
raised funds from,
But you have a governance, you have the county who's up above the Historic Society, and you have an MOU with the county, right? And then you have the Historic Society, and then you have all your donors who give in the money, and the Historic Society kind of pays the bills. Just good to know the ladder and how it all works. Here's the biggest one for me, ethics. Museum ethics, and you could write a whole chapter on it. In fact, somebody did, so I'll pass that out to you. Yay. This comes from the American Association of Museums. They do revise it periodically. This one was revised in 1987. I'm not sure if there's a new one, but this one is really good. And everybody who ever has anything to do with the museum needs to read and understand what's in this document. So I'm going to read a little bit of it to you, some of the highlights that I think are really important. Taken as a whole, museum collections and exhibition materials represent the world's natural and cultural commonwealth. As stewards of that wealth, museums are compelled to advance an understanding of all natural forms and of the human experience. It is incumbent on museums to be resources for humankind and in all their activities to foster an informed appreciation of the rich and diverse world we have inherited. It is also incumbent upon them to preserve that inheritance for posterity. Museums in the United States are grounded in the tradition of public service. They are organized as public trusts, holding their collections and information as a benefit for those they were established to serve. Members of their governing authority, employees, and volunteers are committed to the interests of these beneficiaries. The law provides the basic framework for museum operations. This code of ethics for museums takes compliance of the law as a given. But legal standards are a minimum. Museums and those responsible for them must do more than avoid legal liability. They must take affirmative steps to maintain their integrity so as to warrant public confidence. Anybody disagree with that at all, in any way, shape, or form? No. They must act not only legally but also ethically. This code of ethics for museums therefore outlines ethical standards that frequently exceed legal minimums. Loyalty to the mission of the museum and to the public it serves is the essence of museum work, whether volunteer or paid. Where conflicts of interest arise, actual, potential, or perceived, the duty of loyalty must never be compromised. No individual may use his or her own position in a museum for personal gain or to benefit another at the expense of the museum, its mission, its reputation, and the society it serves. Strong words, very important ones we probably all know, but it's always good to hear them again. For museums, public service is paramount. In subscribing to this code, museums assume responsibility for the actions of members of their governing authority, employees, and volunteers in the performance of museum-related duties. Under governance, the museum governance in its various forms is a public trust responsible for the institution's service to society. The governing authority protects and enhances the museum's collections and programs and its physical, human, and financial resources. It ensures that all these resources support the museum's mission, respond to the pluralism of society, and respect the diversity of the natural and common cultural wealth. So there's lots more. I won't get into more of it. There's things that the governing authority ensures, like all the things that you're supposed to do in a museum, but I won't go and read all of that stuff. And then how you also ensure that the collections stay in your custody and are supported and paid for and all of that. It's something you can read later, and if you need more copies, I'm sure we can make more. And it's sort of the museum Bible. Every docent needs to have read and understood the code of ethics. Museums as institutions provide a safe haven in the community for all people. It's one of those things that when you go to a library or a museum, most of the time there's a certain feeling that you get. Have you experienced that feeling, anybody, when you walk into a museum? And can you describe your feeling for me? Somebody? Anybody want to tackle that one? Do you feel safe?
Yeah.
Yeah? Do you feel like these items are something that are saved for the good of humankind? Do you feel overwhelmed sometimes with that thrill of seeing things that maybe are 10,000 years old? There's just so many emotions sometimes that you can feel in a museum. And a lot of that comes from the fact that the mission that we have is so important. Yes, Doris?
Yeah, on a road trip this summer, I stopped at Fort Stockton, Texas, and they have a museum in an old roadhouse. And there were things that I had never seen, and I had two of my grandkids with me, and they had all of these branding irons. I mean, amazing number of branding irons, and I thought about the men who used them, all the cattle that had been branded with them. They had buggies and all kinds of things. They had a room that was set aside for the Mexican-American exhibits, and I mean, it was, then they had a room with typewriters and typesetting, and it was amazing, the connection that I felt. And the person who introduced us and said, just feel free to walk through, but it was so well laid out that you got a sense of being there in each spot you went. So I felt honored to be there, but I truly felt connected to that place, that time, and all those people who had slept in those beds, and yeah, okay.
It is. It can be an amazing experience, and I've had a lot of those too. I'll tell you about one that was extremely negative. It was up in Oregon, and it was a small museum, and it was like a railroad, I think, like a railroad museum. And I walked in and nobody was there, empty. And I started to look around. There was a desk, nobody there. I started to walk further in, and I could hear two people in the back, and they were actually yelling at each other. They were in the office having a very, very serious discussion. I never felt so awkward in my entire life.
Do they have a bell or anything to announce that you've gone in? Okay.
And no bell, nobody at the desk, and I think my husband was waiting outside, so I hadn't planned to stay long anyway. Believe me, I did not stay long. I actually walked all the way towards the back, towards where they were, and kind of stood out there and was hoping that they would either notice me or see me or something. Nothing. So I turned around and walked out. So you can have a negative experience in a museum, but that's few and far between. And you got to be careful in little museums, because if you're the only one, you're the docent in charge, you don't ever want to engage in a problem like that where people come in and don't feel welcome. The whole mission of a museum is that it's a safe haven for everyone in the community, and if you walk into a museum and you don't feel good or safe, there's something definitely wrong. Yes, Ron?
I feel like I need to counter your story somehow, because it's something positive. And my example is at the Lower Lakes Museum. I went there for 3 or 4 years ago with a couple of friends who were probably 8 to 10 years older than I am. And we walked in, and it's these 2 guys, and they're rough and tumble Lake County guys. And we walk in the door, and we get about halfway in, and one of them just stops dead in his tracks and says, "Oh my God." And we all looked at him, or Greg and I looked at him, and he said, "That's my grandmother's pie safe. It was on our porch when I was a little kid growing up. We never knew what happened to it." And it engendered this whole feeling of safety and perseverance and all the things you just talked about. And it also led to Dwayne coming out, getting out pictures and all those things, and just taking him back to his childhood was really magical.
Yes, that happens,
Really
of course. Yeah, because there were, we get a lot of Pioneer family members who travel to Lake County again after years to come visit their old home there. We actually had relatives meet room, and they didn't know each other. They just happened to both be there at the same time, and they were cousins and had never met. That was like the Copsey family, which was gigantic, so that's why they had never met. But magical things happen in museums, so you want to always make sure when you're here, you're part of the magic. Part of the magic. Moving on, because we can probably go into a lot of good things that have happened in museums, but I think you all understand those. Branding, something that you can, it's your brand, it's your museum, it's your logo, it's everything about your museum that you can put your hand on, that has your image, that keeps people coming back because they see your image and they understand it. Just like you want to go to Macy's and they have the big red star. You know that's Macy's brand. Museums should have those too, and feel free to use it on everything that you have, from shopping bags to signage to flyers to everything. You have a great brand. Your sign is fabulous. It really portrays the time period and the name of Eli Stage Stop. I love it, and you got it on your wine glasses. You got it, flaunt it. That's all I'll say about that. Business policies and procedures. Probably docents don't need to know too much about that unless they need to buy paper clips or know a policy because somebody asked. But probably everyone who is a docent understands that behind the scenes of the docents visiting with the visitors, meeting with the visitors, there's staff back there in the back room typing away on the computer and paying bills and getting things done and building barns and blacksmith shops and all of that stuff. And those are good things for docents to know because they can also tout the accomplishments of the group of people who are responsible and of what's coming in the future for the museum. So it's a good thing to stay up on all that kind of stuff too. Registration, conservation, preservation. Probably docents don't need to think too much about that except to know that that's a big part of the museum also. And every item that you have is a sacred item. There are no little items. There is nothing that is unimportant if it belongs to the museum collection. Everything is special. And it has to be handled in a very special way. And I do have a handout for that also. And this is called Safety and Care and Handling of Museum Objects. Good for all docents to know because